Have you ever stumbled into a moment so unexpected, so raw, that it changes not just the way you see the world but the way you see yourself? That's exactly what happened to Daniel Harper, a man who never thought his life, already messy and unpredictably, would collide with the quiet heartbreak of a woman he'd never met. And trust me, by the time you hear how he walked into that wedding hall with his little girl, you won't be able to forget what happens next. Daniel Harper was a 36-year-old single father, the kind of man who wore his struggles in the faint lines across his forehead and the calluses on his hands. Life hadn't been kind to him, but he was never the kind of man to complain. His wife, Anna, had passed away 6 years earlier in a car accident, leaving him alone with their daughter, Lily, who was just 2 at the time. Ever since then, Daniel had poured every ounce of himself into raising his daughter, learning how to braid her hair badly, packing her school lunches with too many carrot sticks, and showing up to every parent-teacher meeting with the quiet nervousness of someone trying too hard to do it all right. For Daniel, Lily was his entire world. She had his brown eyes, her mother's dimpled smile, and a way of making even the darkest days feel brighter with her curiosity and chatter. She was 7 now, and her energy seemed endless. She was also the reason they were at the community center that Saturday afternoon, where the echoes of music, laughter, and clinking glasses spilled out from the hall. Daniel had been invited by an old friend who ran the catering for the event. It wasn't that he knew the bride or groom personally, he didn't, but his friend, seeing how Daniel often spent weekends with just his daughter and very little adult company, had insisted he stop by, if only for the food and the chance to let Lily dance. And so, reluctantly, Daniel had agreed. The community hall had been decorated beautifully, white flowers lining the archways, golden fairy lights twinkling like stars against the ceiling, and tables draped in soft ivory cloth. Guests mingled, laughter rose in waves, and children darted between chairs with uncontainable excitement. It was the kind of scene that usually made Daniel feel out of place, like he was intruding on a happiness he couldn't quite touch. But Lily was thrilled, her tiny hands clutching at his as she pointed to the dance floor where children were spinning in circles. "Daddy, can I dance?" she asked, her eyes shining. Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Go ahead, sweetheart, just stay where I can see you." As Lily ran off, Daniel stood quietly by the edge of the hall, his hands tucked into his pockets, watching the world around him. Weddings always stirred something in him, a bittersweet ache for what he had lost and what he might never find again. But this night, his attention shifted somewhere unexpected. It was near the far corner of the room, where the soft glow of a chandelier barely reached, that he noticed her. A young woman, dressed in the most elegant white gown, lace trailing down her sleeves and veil pinned neatly in her dark hair. She was stunning, not in the polished, picture-perfect way of magazine brides, but in the deeply human way of someone whose story lingered on her face. And on her face, Daniel saw what made her different: a faint but unmistakable scars running along her cheek and jawline, like silver lines etched by fire or tragedy. She wasn't surrounded by friends or laughter. She wasn't posing for photographs or clinking champagne glasses. She was alone, sitting at a table with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her head slightly bowed. Daniel thought at first she was simply catching her breath, but then he noticed the shimmer of tears sliding down her cheeks. She was crying quietly, desperately, as though she had mastered the art of making her pain invisible to everyone but herself. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, Daniel couldn't look away. It was unusual, wasn't it? A bride, dressed in beauty and light, sitting in the corner of her own wedding celebration, weeping as though her world were breaking apart. The sight pulled at something deep inside him. He knew pain. He knew what it was to sit in a room full of people and still feel crushingly alone. But what could he do? He was a stranger. This was not his story, not his place. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had been meant to see her at that exact moment. The music around him shifted, guests clapping to a lively rhythm as the dance floor filled. Daniel's eyes flicked toward Lily, who was twirling happily with another child, her laughter ringing out like bells. Relieved she was safe, he turned back toward the bride. She was still there, her hand trembling as she wiped at her cheeks, her shoulders hunched as though trying to make herself small, invisible. Something in Daniel stirred. Maybe it was the years of being a father, of learning to comfort his daughter when she was scared or lonely. Maybe it was the echo of his late wife's voice reminding him that kindness, even in small doses, could heal wounds we couldn't see. Whatever it was, Daniel found his feet moving before his mind could argue. He walked across the hall, each step feeling heavier with doubt, until he stood a few feet from her table. The bride looked up suddenly, startled by his presence. Her eyes startlingly blue, red-rimmed from crying met his, and for a moment, Daniel felt as though he had stepped into a silence so deep it drowned out the music behind them. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his voice gentle, almost hesitant. "I didn't mean to intrude. I just a broken bar. I noticed you seemed upset. Are you all right?" Her lips parted, as though to answer, but then she shook her head quickly, brushing another tear away. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her trembling hands betrayed her words. Daniel hesitated, torn between respecting her privacy and the undeniable pull to comfort her. He thought about walking away. He thought about leaving her to her solitude. But then he remembered the countless nights he had sat alone in his kitchen, grief clawing at his chest, wishing Ania would see through the mask and simply say, "You're not alone." So he stayed. "I know I'm a stranger," Daniel said quietly, "and maybe I shouldn't say anything about a broken bar. Sometimes it helps to talk, or even just sit with someone who isn't expecting you to smile." The bride blinked at him, her tears slowing as she studied his face. There was no judgment in his expression, only a kind of weary empathy that seemed to mirror her own hidden pain. For the first time, she allowed herself a small, shaky breath. "My name is Clara," she whispered finally, her voice breaking. "Daniel," he said gently, offering a small smile. "And that whirlwind on the dance floor is my daughter, Lily." Clara glanced toward the children, her lips curving faintly despite her tears. "She looks happy." "She is," Daniel replied softly, "but happiness doesn't mean life's been easy." He paused, then added carefully, "I get the sense you know something about that." For a long moment, Clara said nothing. The noise of the celebration swelled around them, but at their little corner table, it felt as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Finally, she whispered, "Do you ever feel like you have a broken bar? No matter how much you try, people only see the scars, not the person." The question hung between them, fragile and aching. Daniel's heart clenched, because though his scars weren't visible on his skin, he carried them all the same. Before he could answer, someone called Clara's name across the hall, a stern voice, urgent and sharp. Her shoulders stiffened, and she quickly wiped her face, straightening as though preparing for battle. Daniel didn't move, didn't push, but in that instant, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of a story far bigger than he had imagined. And as the night unfolded, Daniel Harper, a single father, widower, ordinary Mona, would soon discover that the simple act of noticing a crying bride would change not just her life, but his own. The name that echoed across the hall struck Clara like a whip. She flinched, her hands clenching in her lap, the faint tremor of fear darting across her face. Daniel noticed instantly, his chest tightening with a protective instinct he hadn't expected to feel for a woman he'd just met. Whoever had called her name, it wasn't with love or kindness. It carried a weight of control, of authority, like a chain rattling in the distance. Clara's eyes darted toward the sound, then back at Daniel, wide and pleading. "Please," she whispered urgently, "don't tell anyone you saw me cry." Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Of course, whatever you need." A man in a dark suit appeared at the edge of the hall, scanning the crowd before his eyes landed on Clara. His jaw was tight, his movements sharp as he strode toward her. Daniel instinctively shifted slightly, not to block her, but to be close enough if she needed him. The man leaned down, his voice low but harsh. "Clara, the guests are waiting." "What are you doing here?" "Yeah, I just needed a moment," Clara stammered, her fingers twisting together. The man's eyes flicked to Daniel briefly, narrowing with suspicion, before returning to Clara. "We'll talk later. Don't make a scene." And with that, he straightened and walked back toward the laughter and lights. Clara let out a shaky breath, her body sagging as though the tension had drained every ounce of strength. Daniel's hands clenched in his pockets, his heart pounding. He wanted to say something. He wanted to tell her she didn't deserve to be spoken to that way, but he bit back the words. This wasn't his place. A broken bar, not yet. Still, the image of her tears wouldn't leave him. Clara, he said softly, once they were alone again. Who was that? She shook her head quickly, her eyes filling again. No one. It doesn't matter. But it did matter. Daniel could see it in the way her hands trembled, in the way her voice broke. And though he didn't push, he stayed. He stayed because he knew sometimes people just needed someone to sit in their silence until they were ready to speak. Minutes passed, and slowly, Clara's breathing steadied. Finally, she whispered, "That was my fiancé tilde copyright. Well, a broken bar, my husband now." She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. "I should be happy. This should be the happiest day of my life." But instead, a broken bar, her voice cracked, and she looked away, tears slipping freely now. "Instead, I feel like I'm suffocating." Daniel's chest ached. Weddings were supposed to be about joy, about promise and hope. Yet here was a bride, dressed in white lace, drowning in despair. "Clara," he said gently, "no one should feel that way on their wedding day." She gave a bitter laugh, broken and hollow. "You don't understand. People look at me, and all they see are the scars. They see someone who should be grateful anyone would marry her at all. Everyone says I'm lucky, that I should hold on tight and not complain." But in a broken bar, she trailed off, shaking her head. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice steady, calm. "You're not lucky because someone chose you. Someone is lucky if they earn the right to stand beside you. Don't ever forget that." Her eyes shot to his, stunned by the conviction in his tone. For a long moment, she simply stared, as though trying to decide whether to believe him. Just then, a burst of laughter rang out, and Daniel turned his head to see Lily skipping toward him. Her face flushed with joy. She stopped short when she saw Clara, tilting her head curiously. "Hi," Lily chirped, her voice sweet and innocent. "You're pretty. Are you the princess?" Clara blinked, her lips parting in surprise. Then, to Daniel's relief, a genuine smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, a small, fragile smile, but real nonetheless. "Something like that," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of sadness and wonder. Lily reached out and touched the lace of Clara's gown. "You look like one." "Daddy, doesn't she look like a princess?" Daniel's gaze never left Clara's face as he answered softly, "She does."